Super. So thanks very much for taking the time to be here. So my name is Fredrik Hult. I'm former Santander, and the panel will introduce themselves, and then we'll kick off into a bit of an intro, setting the scene about the topic, and some interesting problem sets that I think probably will resonate with both the panel and hopefully yourself. And depending on time and any disruptions, we'll have Q&A as well. So, as I said, my name is Fredrik Hult, former CISO for the payment rails of Santander Group, and a few other things as well.
So, I'm Barbara Aung, I'm the CISO for Virgin Media IT.
And Chris Dace, I'm the CISO and Resilience Officer for Royal London Group.
Morning everyone, I'm Trethowan and I'm the CISO for Brit Insurance.
Fantastic. So, we're here to talk about AI. Very on-trend topic, especially if you follow X or Twitter at the moment. There's quite a lot of interesting developments in that scene at the moment, so let's see how that plays out. But perhaps also talk a little bit about the topic in general. I mean, many people talk about AI now, probably equating with generative AI, the LLM models and so on that are being highly in use. But if you look at machine learning and so on as a broader topic, it's been around us for a very, very long time. If you know any credit scoring algorithm, social media, if you're an avid user of TikTok or Facebook, then machine learning obviously will be very, very familiar to you. And also I'd like to throw in some personal anecdotes and so on here, and then go over to the broader topic. We're almost coming now to a generation of AI natives, right? So if you look at the Zoomers or the generation coming after them, they will grow up with AI being normal. This is a little bit like, if you remember, cast your minds back to the advent of the mass adoption of the commercial internets in the early to mid-90s. Almost a similar feeling. So the mass adoption of commercial internet has been around for about 30 years, give or take. And then mobile internet and smartphones with App Store 2008, so we're talking 15 years. AI, as in terms of generative AI, has only really been around for, what, a couple of years maybe, in terms of mass adoption. Maybe even less so, has had a tremendous and massive impact. You probably see a lot of value, maybe, in what you do. I certainly see it from what I do in terms of generative AI. I use many of these tools to 10x my productivity in many cases, so at least make less mistakes. And but then it comes to a question here of how do you actually view AI? Many people fear AI. They talk about the robots will come to kill us. If you think about science fiction, it's probably been quite guiding light in this topic for many years. Maybe you're familiar with a book called Neuromancer by William Gibson. It was released in 1984. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. This book introduced cyberspace as a concept, etc. And not to reveal the plot too much, but there's a rogue AI as one of the actors in this book. And a lot of the themes tend to hover around this, around ethics, and it's something that we'll go into as a panel and talk more about, the ethics about AI. And that's the sort of downside of AI. The upside, obviously, is plentiful. I'm also going to go through my notes here, because I had some really insightful things I wanted to say. So we're experimenting with this, we're deploying it into production in many cases, learning as we go. Marie Curie, you may be familiar with, is the only person that's won 2 Nobel Prizes. So she discovered radium and I think polonium as well. Radioactive materials, she worked with them with no protection or nothing. And then unfortunately she passed away from the cancers that she developed from working with this. She made groundbreaking discoveries by suffering the side effects of these discoveries. So perhaps something to think about here is how can we mass accelerate adoption of AI while still being conscious of potential side effects as we go forward. If you look at what the current generation of generative AI models can provide is they are very, very good at combining existing known concepts. So if we look at novelty and innovation here, how much is what we do genuinely novel and how much is really recombining in different ways existing knowledge, which is what AI is very, very good at. Many job roles days, money for old rope, if you will, may become replaced by people who actually can use AI very well. So those type of things may cause a lot of tremors in broader society that we maybe need to be mindful of. That's really what I want to say here. So going forward in this, if you look at all the companies that are doing here, Meta, they did a massive corporate pivot. So they were heavily focused on metaverse for a very long time, realized that was probably not the best investment of their time. Now they're pushing open source AI quite heavily. Tesla, as you know as well, Google, etc. So many of the big companies are out there doing very big things in AI. So the question, I guess, is what are your companies doing in this topic as well? So what I would love to talk about here with the panel is this. A bit about how you're using AI today, how you view the use of AI today, the risks, the upsides and the downsides, and then also focusing a little bit on two particular issues that tend to be quite common. One is data leak, i.e. intellectual property considerations, and also your internal data that may leak into public models, and also authentication. So, you know, remember the old adage, on the internet no one knows your dog? At least I'm old enough to remember that cartoon. Well, now with deep fakes, that may come back in a big way. So that's something also for us to talk about a little bit. And the ethics around AI. So starting with the first one, maybe Barbara, you want to kick off and say, how are you currently using AI in your business today, in terms of plans? Obviously nothing, you know, sensitive or controversial. And what's your perspective there? And we can go into the other questions later.
Yeah, so from our point of view, we're using AI, if you're staying on the security side, I think in the same environment, you've always been using AI and we're using it more and more, and I expect that to grow. But I think the other challenge, and I think the area we're going to want to go into, is using it to harness and get the most out of the massive amounts of data that we have as a company, and use that to make more predictive, more individual offers, rather than just creating a very limited, segmented, but still very broad service offering. So I think these are two areas I think of massive growth. I mean, with regards to where are we with regards to, so that brings security challenges. I think, starting to put together acceptable use policies. We're not massively far in our AI journey, but it's definitely an area to keep a close eye on and look at in the future.
So in terms of the board perception, the business has committed to that AI is one useful option going forward.
I think there is no doubt about that. The board want to use AI as much as possible and get as much out of this, and automation as it's a big buzzword. So it's only going to come. So from a security point of view, we can just try and put some guardrails in place while we still have some control before it completely runs away.
Fantastic. So Chris, what's your position?
So we're adopting it. I would say I haven't seen this much excitement around a new technology trend for quite some time. And we were reflecting the other day, you know, we have a tech advisory group and we talk to the business about new tech trends. Mm-hmm. And it was very difficult to get them excited about, you know, blockchain, metaverse. Gen AI in particular feels very different. The business have really grabbed this and they're running with this at quite some pace. So we have 8 different use cases around the business right now. Brings some challenges, which I guess we'll come back to, but we have 8 different use cases around the business, and we look at it through 2 lenses. You can have complementary AI, so AI that really just helps you do a day-to-day job better and more efficiently, or very transformative AI, and we're very much in the complementary AI. So the use cases are all around uplifting productivity, automating research, running quality assurance of recorded customer service calls. What we're absolutely not in the game at the moment is a more transformative, radical AI. So, you know, we've got no immediate plans, for example, for an autonomous Gen AI-enabled customer service agent. That's not where we're at. But I've been quite blown away by the pace at which the business have understood the technology and that they're running with it. And we've had to mount a bit of a rearguard actions put in place, you know, the guide rails that Barbara was talking about.
Sounds very familiar. So how about you, Ben?
Very similar position, I think, to both Barbara and Chris as well. So yes, I mean, I'd say that we're probably more than dipping a toe into generative AI now, more kind of putting a foot in, perhaps. So as Chris was saying, I think, you know, we're definitely embracing that as a tool, as an assistant. In fact, we've just committed to building our own LLM for embedding within one of our underwriting platforms to basically help shorten the analytics timeframe for underwriters, right? So again, a very easy use case to kind of apply that sort of technology to, because we have a lot of static data around class risk, etc. And really it's allowing that conversational style model with the underwriters to say, what would this look like? You know, have we done this before? So massive business benefit. I think absolutely we're at the peak of a hype cycle, so there's a lot of attention internally. And again, very similar to what Barbara and Chris were saying, I think we as a cyber team are now playing catch up a little bit on that because, of course, we don't want to stifle what the innovation team are doing. I don't think we'd be able to anyway. So I have heard from some people that they're obviously trying to block access to GPT or whatever it might be. It's probably not effective. I don't believe personally it'd be effective. It's more putting those sensible guardrails in place to make sure that the developers are aware of what they're doing, especially around that data. So I mean, a lot of that data, as we were saying, data protection is sensitive. It's commercially sensitive data. So I think it's just making sure that people are aware. Yes, it's a fantastic tool. Yes, understand its limitations, but please make sure you're using our internal instance. Don't go and push that into a public environment.
So I think the narrative you convey here is a lot on the sort of data leak angle, which obviously many people care about. And I don't know, you're also in the audience, you may have come across that where people upload fairly sensitive documents. Please summarize it for me, and et cetera, et cetera. And so how do you tackle this? Maybe start with you, Barbara. How do you tackle this from a data leak perspective? Are you considering filters, or is it that you go private tenant, or what would be your preferred approach?
I think my preferred approach would be a private tenant. It would be having some very clear guidance around what can we put out on the internet, not on the internet, what can we put out on the AI, which is, as far as I'm concerned, and what should never go there, and also how do we segregate and microsegregate and impose zero trust as much as possible and segregation as much as possible. Because otherwise, as soon as you're losing control of the data, not only the confidentiality, but I do worry about the integrity and the quality of that input data as well.
Okay, so it sounds fantastic. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, private tenant for us. So we did take quite a draconian approach actually in terms of shutting down access to not just ChatGPT, but also some of the other common AI domains, so Google Bard and others. Yeah. Because we found that, and it was really interesting, parts of the business you thought would never use it. We're actually out the blocks and putting quite sensitive data in. So we had a bit of a regard action. We closed those down. We've gone private tenant. We were an early adopter for Copilot, so we're part of the Copilot scheme. And having got the private tenants in place for the ones that we want to work with, we're now working on those guide rails. So I mean, Ben and I work in financial services, and regulation around this is coming. There's no doubt about that. But rather than wait for the regulation to arrive, we've actually put in place a set of guide rails, and we've worked with quite a cross-functional group of people. So we've had legal, risk, cybersecurity, technology, the business all coming together to agree what those guide rails should be. And I'm afraid it's just going to be part of an ongoing education, and over time we will have to look at filters undoubtedly and other mechanisms.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Ben?
Absolutely. So I think, as Chris was saying, I think in terms of the innovation and the tools we're trying to build into our underwriting platforms, yes, private tenant, absolutely, nice and easy. But I think when you're talking about AI for kind of business productivity, so outside of that world where actually the developers are quite savvy, we can talk to them, they understand what guardrails are. Actually, as Chris was saying, the full workforce, we are trialing Copilot. They're playing with those things, and that's arguably the kind of more difficult challenge, I guess, because those people are, really interested in adopting those services, perhaps slightly less savvy on where that data is going, especially if it's not a private tenant. So I think that's definitely the more challenging aspect. And Chris was saying, obviously, about kind of blocking access to certain platforms. I think it's just, I wouldn't use the word block, I'd use the word direct, I guess. So I think what we're trying to do is direct them to the right place. So obviously, yes, using our Copilot licenses within our tenant. We've seen where people have kind of been using their own personal subscriptions for things, not that that's unusual in our world, right? I think it's, as Chris was saying, it's kind of a never-ending cycle, right?
So I think you have a very similar approach, and just in my previous work in large banks and banks I'm currently advising, private tenant tends to be the way to go. Sometimes they use open source models and they fine tune it with their own data. Now that leads to other problems. So you have now invested a lot of compute, a lot of time into fine tuning your own model. That's worth a lot of money. So if you look at the old machine learning days as well, I remember credit scoring models and so on that were fantastic, really great. That's worth a lot. In terms of data, that's actually not a lot of data to exfiltrate. Right? To steal a model, that's not a lot of data at all. If you steal the weights, that could be valuable. So what are your thoughts, Barbara, maybe start with you, on how do you actually protect the models themselves?
I think you have to go back to classic data protection mechanisms, you have to go back to your access control, you have to go back to your monitoring. And for me, monitoring and understanding what is actually going on your network is absolutely key. And zero trust microsegmentation, because particularly in a network like ours that's grown organically, microsegmentation is absolutely key to allow us to control and reduce the attack surface risk.
Great. How about you, Chris? Sorry, I'm putting you guys on the spot here.
No. I love the comment about network microsegmentation. I said the flat network is a bane of my life, and something we've been grappling with for some time. But yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, management of these models, right? And I think we've been working quite hard to say who's responsible for what within the organisation. So it's clear that, you know, the information security teams have kind of maybe more classic responsibilities around this, and then the business owners really have to manage the models and the way that these models are being used, the way that they're behaving. You know, how do you, the data exfiltration risk is part of it, but also how do you manage bias, how do you manage drift? You know, that's where the kind of business owners of the use of those models really have to step up and play a role, and I think it's quite a unique operating model and framework that we're having to think through now.
How about you, Ben?
No, absolutely. I think, you know, much like cyber, the other teams are trying to catch up with the pace of this as well. So, you know, data management, etc. I think, yeah, we've got somewhere to go in them understanding what, as you're saying, what is the value of this model? What does it look like? How would we classify that? Yeah, so I think there's certainly a kind of governance aspect, and then, you know, the understanding of those various teams. I think also from a cyber perspective, the tooling needs to catch up as well, right? So I think for a long time we've had good concepts of tagging this and doing that and filtering that, and we're hey, great. And actually, again, the tools haven't caught up yet. What is this? It's a file with a bunch of numbers in, model weights, etc. Is that good? Is that bad? So I think, you know, it's both. You know, both of those aspects need to accelerate.
And perhaps something to add to this is that how you compensate or detect manipulation of the weights, as in the integrity angle as well. As these systems, so that's actually, part of my background is also financial systemic risk. So, you know, doom and gloom. How can cyber kill the society? And that's hard, even for deterministic systems in the core bank. Right, so payment systems tend to be deterministic still, i.e. rule-based systems. In isolation, easy to model and understand how they work. In aggregate, really hard, because complexity drives unpredictable behavior. Okay, so let's project the future where we have self-learning, self-modifying systems subject to various states of change control, maybe in a DevOps continuous flow. How do we model risk? How do we actually manage society in a robust way? That's something just throwing out there, because it's probably not a canned answer for all that. But something to think about here is that we're really moving away from fairly simplistic systems that are reasonably doable to grasp into more of a model where, well, we're almost bordering into human psychology and actually understand how things operate. So maybe a future role for a CISO could be AI psychologist. I don't know.
Well, but I do worry as well about the dependency we're building on some of this third-party technology. And, you know, with my resilience hat on, you look at Microsoft as an example. They are absolutely critical to our operation. We're utterly dependent on them. You know, the more that we use these black box AI technologies, where frankly you don't necessarily understand how the engine works, it's provided by another party, I think that poses more and more of the concentration risk, and I know that's something that the FS regulators are looking at as well.
Yeah, I'm about to mention that. I think for us, in terms of regulated, you know, in regulated space, it's already difficult enough, I think, for the regulators and for us to try and explain to the regulators how our existing deterministic systems work. It's already a complex picture. Try and then throw some AI into that, where it is much more black box than traditional systems. I think it will just blow their minds, frankly.
And how about your telecoms? Do you have a similar challenge there, Barbara?
I think we will do, and I mean, with a lot of the telecoms regulation and TSA being here or being around the corner, it will become more and more of a challenge to meet regulation, and it's definitely becoming a more regulated industry as a whole. So having AI models, for me, it is still about, you mentioned it already, about data poisoning and integrity of their data and integrity of the models and what we feed in and what we feed out and the value that we're getting out of it. Are we creating bias? Are we So these are really questions where I don't necessarily have an answer, but things that I'm concerned about with regards to how are we gonna really deal with the vast amount of data and that data poisoning, or ensuring what comes out of AI. It still needs some kind of, for me, human outlook, human checks to ensure that what we are pushing out is not actually going to create a massive reputational risk for us based on AI decisions.
No, I think you're right. I think a huge challenge for many companies probably will be to demonstrate that decisions are fair.
Yeah.
And that's even hard for a normal machine learning model. Look at a credit scoring model and so on. Okay, so what drove a certain decision? That can be challenging, or but many others also. But look at onboarding then. So many companies move towards digital channels because, well, it's profitable. And now obviously no one knows you're a dog, right? So deep fakes are increasing, etc. There are some countermeasures. Look at some of the digital attacker banks. They tend to actually almost be there already with some videos when you onboard and so on, right? So what's your perspective? Maybe start with you, Barbara, on digital onboarding and KYC, i.e. authentication by extension, in this world of AI?
Good question. I think for me a lot of this is about not putting all your trust in the LLM system, but actually looking at authentication outside of it using APIs, because this self-monitoring and self-regulation of the ALM, it's just not going to work, and it's just going to exacerbate the issue that we have with all the deepfake, and yeah, so for me it is about external validation of authorization access control.
So effectively a larger data universe than the data points you currently process, yeah. Okay, how about you?
Yeah, I agree completely with Barbara that. I think it's external validation, it's multi-level authentication. I think deepfake represents just a major issue. I think, you know, if you look at where we got to on our own cyber culture journey, you know, people have pretty much learned how to deal with phishing attacks. Susceptibility level for us had really fallen away, reporting levels were high. We'd almost cracked that, right? But we're now seeing quite sophisticated phishing attacks already coming through. So that's, you know, impersonation of senior officers within our company. There was one that involved our CEO actually just a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, I think the more AI develops, the more easy it's going to be to run attacks of that kind. And you only need 3 seconds of voice recording to actually generate a meaningful deep fake. So huge issue, and it's one of the key things that we're going to have to grapple with, I think, over the next 12 months.
How about you?
Yeah, absolutely agree with that as well. I think, yeah, the biggest concern for me is, and we're already seeing, as Chris was saying, the increase in the sophistication and the targeting of phishing internally, a huge spike recently. I think that's the main concern is protection of the workforce, protection of us as an organisation, as an enterprise, rather than, I suppose we've got it slightly easier because we're business to business. So actually, you know, we can do a lot more in terms of knowing who our customers are. I'd say, you know, insurance is relatively old-fashioned still, so I'm not expecting AI to kind of transform that element overnight. Let's say the way that we do business with other agents and cover holders and brokers, etc. But I think for my security operations team and for our service desk, it's already becoming a challenge in terms of the phishing aspect, and then of course you can layer on the deepfakes and everything else on top of that.
I think so. My personal perspective on this topic is that there might be really old school solutions to this problem. Digital identity is still not very widely used in society. There are countries, so I'm going to be super biased here just for a minute. Please just humor me. So I'm Swedish, and whenever I go abroad, I go analog. But in Sweden, I use a digital identity. I used it for 20 years, and it's fully adopted by the whole population. Adult population now on the smartphone as well, including the NFC passports is on the phone. So it's based on old school PKI, right? And I think the phishing challenge here is your email is not plugged into these systems. Voice as well, etc., etc. So deep fakes, there might be there might be an angle here to go back to really old-fashioned, maybe not so sexy solutions such as proper digital identities backed by trusted and proven technologies to help you understand who you're talking to, rather than now using the voice, the facial characteristics and so on that are increasingly easy to mimic and copy. Hopefully some of the crypto algorithms used in these PKIs will still hold up. Well, but no one mentioned quantum, please. So, okay, but then what's the upside then for us? And thinking a little bit about AI and generative AI. So we're cyber people here, maybe most of you are as well. You know, upside of using security in the tooling that we use or in our operations, many of the products that you use today, the security controls you use today, are increasingly including LLM or other forms of AI functionality, right? So myself, an avid user of an Intel tool that automatically summarizes Intel products in multiple languages in my language, whatever I choose. And that's very helpful for me in terms of briefing content up to various people. I'm sure, so I would love to hear, how is your day-to-day CISO role transforming in terms of making you and your team more effective using AI, or do you have plans to do so?
I think for me, the biggest area for use of AI for us, it's the SIEM, it's the nuances you can bring to incident response and to crisis management, all that data that they can harvest. It's generally automation. A lot of automation using AI, having some more advanced models can really bring a lot of benefits in our efficiencies.
Yeah, great. So we basically 10x your people effectively. Could
Yes.
I help bridge the skills gaps? I mean, many people talk about there's not enough cyber people, there's a skills gap, etc. Could I help bridge that potentially?
I think
level up
so.
people?
I think it can help, and it also creates a whole new set of skills that are required to work in that industry, but it's also attracting hopefully more talent and more young people into that industry and helping them train up. And I think where we have people who've grown up with AI are far more closer to it. I think that the uses they'll come up is probably not something we can necessarily imagine and where we want to go. So for me, at the moment, it's nuances on incident response and crisis management, but I'll see.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think some of the themes, it's automation, efficiency, it's delivering greater insights. And a lot of the third parties that we work with are already leveraging this, right? So we're a big CrowdStrike customer. Those guys are pretty sophisticated in terms of their adoption of AI, and you see it coming through and what their product set can deliver. We use Accenture as a managed security service partner. They've been able to really automate their process to deliver more value with the same number of people. And we set each of our security heads a challenge for next year to say, you know, let's come up with 3 use cases within the internal security world to look at the art of the possible and demonstrate value. So while the business have got their use cases, we'll have our own. But I think for us, predominantly, it's going to be in things like Security Operations Centre and really enabling us to make sense of, you know, the huge gloss of Splunk alerts that we have coming through every day and pick out those key insights.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ben, how about you?
Yeah, very similar. I think, you know, it's embedded at tool level really well, has been for a long time, right, in our world, in the cyber world. You know, we've had machine learning for anomaly detection for a long time now in the SIEM. Obviously, we're now starting to see more LLM-style interfaces coming in terms of kind of bots and assistants in those platforms, which is great. So absolutely, I think the main beneficiaries of that are the operational teams, SOC, etc. I mean, I'd dearly love to have a similar thing for my role in terms of CISO. In fact, I think we were having a conversation last night, Freddie, weren't we, around joining data from disparate platforms in disparate worlds, not just technical platforms, but governance platforms as well, right? So when the CEO does ask you, are we good over the, you know, around this risk or around this threat, you know, for us as CISOs, we're joining multiple worlds together. It's not just a technical question, it's not a SIEM question, it's not a, you know, vulnerability management question, it's also a supply chain security question and everything else as well. I think if we could find something that integrated and pulled that data together, again, it's just data analytics, right? I think it's optimizing and making us more effective.
I would agree. I think the co-pilot concept has a lot of power to it. A common constraint I come up against is that you have great teams, but they don't have enough bandwidth, they don't have enough time. There's a lot of toil in what we do, I think, as security professionals. So something that I tend to use is a completely stolen concept from the military. It's called tooth to tail. Right? Tooth to tail is a US Army concept. Tooth to tail is the ratio of fighting troops versus supporting personnel. So in a cyber context, it would be number of people able to respond to an incident effectively versus all the supporting people around governance, compliance, and all the other processes. If that ratio is very low, that means, well, you're going to struggle if you get attacked and when you get attacked. Right? But then AI co-pilots may be able to 10x your people, which means you become better at responding. Or it helps reduce the toil, which means more people are able to mobilize whenever something goes wrong. Because it will. That's inevitable. It's just a matter of time. So I think that might be quite helpful, actually. And I've seen a tremendous amount of value in there. Also to take fairly junior analysts and accelerate the learning curve by having almost like this automated mentor. I don't know what your experience is. I've seen many teams where there is a lot of new people joining the team. And the more experienced people, they want to transfer their knowledge, but business as usual is taking so much time. So there's this tension between doing their work and actually growing the talent base. Well, if you have co-pilots, some of this can be done in parallel. So there's probably a massive potential here to really increase the productivity of the teams. Also as a CISO, decision-making, support, analytics, interacting with the board and so on. And I've heard of a really cool startup that seems to be working on this CISO board interactions, which I'd love to hear more comments on maybe from the audience. That might be helpful for us CISOs here to get the decision-making support. Now we have 7 minutes left. I'd love to hear any final comments from you and if you have to offer. Anything from you, Barbara, maybe they want to add before we open up to questions? I think we're finishing in 7.
Yeah, no, I think nothing specific to add that we haven't.
They haven't covered. Okay. Chris, how about you?
No, I think really good run through, but I think if you are grappling with this, my advice is just keep it simple. And we haven't created a big program of work around this. You know, we built a simple cross-functional working group. We probably will industrialise it and have more of a dedicated centre of excellence, but yeah, keep it simple and don't wait for the regulation to define what you need to do.
How about you?
Absolutely. I think the last thing I'd say is collaboration is key, right? And I'm looking for help from you guys, from everyone, as much as probably everyone else is, right? So I think for us as security professionals, we just need to trade those war stories, to keep talking about this, because as with most things, again, in cyber, we're slightly behind the curve and probably always will be. So I think, yeah, that's the key.
I think a final note from me is the productivity angle. I'm so bullish on AI. It's been an absolute game changer, really, genuinely so. And I think it's a way also, I think, for the CISO to transition in terms of transformation of the role into a role that can be, if I put it this way, some organizations have promoted CISOs into business executive roles because of their transformative experience. Really genuinely building a solid CISO function is hard. And increasingly the executive layer is recognizing this and promoting CISOs into business executive transformation roles. My former boss got promoted. So, he's now head of retail and commercial banking at Santander globally. So he's a former CISO, right? So AI can help us on that path potentially. So, but I'd love to hear comments and questions or any remarks. The floor is free. Whoa, okay. Okay, do we have a roving mic or maybe just use your diaphragm? You were first, actually.
Yeah, one for Chris. Obviously, you went down the route of blocking it.
Yeah.
What was the impact from the business? When we tried to block websites before and access to things that, regardless whether it be AI or something else, the business goes absolutely mental.
Yeah, it was, how can I put it? It was mixed, right? And actually what helped, so our loudest complainers, we have an asset management business in London and very, very modern thinking, and they were the ones who were the most vocal. But I think what we did was we said, look, just bear with us, right? We're going to put some basic guide rails in place. We're not going to block access to these domains forever, and we talked them through some of the potential risks. And I think once they got that and they could see that we can put a time limit on the restrictions, they were okay. And actually, I think most people around the business now, they can see the guidelines and they can see we've opened up. We were as diplomatic as we could be. It wasn't computer says no outright, but it did generate a little bit of a vocal reaction to begin with. But again, I think that's to Ben's point, is we need that kind of cross-functional collaboration. And now the asset managers are kind of proud to be seen as early adopters, and they're up and running and doing some really cool stuff with it.
Cool, thank you. How about you, sir? I think you, and then you, and then I think you. Okay.
So, just picking up on your thing about from a security perspective, where it can help.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, if you look at the potential for poisoning the pot So if you've got a bad network that is already generating bad data into Splunk, been there, done that, then AI will look at it and go, that's normal. It's only when you stop it, it goes, oh, actually that's something to, that shouldn't have been there. How do you address that?
If I may respond, I'll open up. It depends. If the model has been trained on what bad looks like in a high quality way, it will detect the badness in your network, right? But I think what you're looking here at is more of an old school machine learning way of normalized data sets and so on. But I'll take your views. No?
No, well, yeah,
No, take it.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I agree. I think it's about training and it's back to model management as well, because you're always going to have that.
Yeah.
Those inherent problems. You never get rid of them. It's managing the model to try and limit and overcome those, I think.
Yeah, no, it is about really looking at the integrity of your data, really looking at your input data. I agree, having bad input data is one of the key concerns that I have with AI models, and how do we stop it from learning this. But yeah, robust checks.
Because we've seen this type of attacks previously, because spam filters, good old-fashioned Bayesian filters and what have you, which learned. Google got absolutely hammered because somebody set up a bot which created millions of not spam records and was able to just keep sending out spam because of it. So, it is something that we as a cybersecurity community needs to be concerned about.
I mean, as you're saying, this is not a new problem, though, right? I mean, I think since we've had machine learning embedded into NIDS type tools, intrusion detection, etc., and the vendor walks in and says, right, we now need to train it on your environment. And my first question is, how do you know my environment's not already bad, right? And they go, silence, because they don't know. Exactly. And I think again. From my experience, it's just been mostly being cognizant of that. Presumably they don't get that question that often, because when I ask that question and they then go silent, probably means that not enough people are asking them that question, which is, okay, so what you're saying is I need to have confidence that a portion or a representative portion of my environment is clean enough to train your model to then actually get some value out of that tool.
Thank you so much for that. Sorry, I think you were next. And then Judith.
So, you've said that these models are very valuable and that you need to protect them. I would suggest that you need to think very hard when you're developing these models how vulnerable they are to external changes. So in medicine, imagine all those models that were developed up until March 2020, and the pandemic will have just destroyed hundreds of PhD projects, loads of machine learning algorithms, etc. And so I would suggest that maybe a greater percentage of models will be damaged by big changes in the external environment, and that when you're developing your model, you need to think, how much is it worth investing if such and such a financial crisis or war, a pandemic, is going to completely destroy that model. And I would suggest people need to think about that.
No, I agree. I couldn't agree more, especially in trading where all the assets were correlated. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so one of the questions I like to ask you about is, how do you see the whole AI in a way as a way to clean up our risk management workflows, our understanding of risk, and allowing us to add context? And by the way, I'm on two extremes here. I'm a massive, adopter of Gen AI to augment the human capability more and more. I'm on the side that I don't think we should be plugging these things to the users because we don't understand the side effects of what's going on. And I actually think that customizing models is crazy dangerous because we don't know how to get the data out of it. But focusing on the productive side of it, risk management and context, because that's a big problem we always have in the industry, is what do we fix, what do we focus on? So how do you see Gen AI to allow us to scale that?
So I'll just take a little bit and then I'll pass over. So I would say this, Gen AI can address a massive pain point, and that is subjective assessments. right? Especially the way you have the huge variable of analyst bias and in divergence of analyst capability. I've seen it in supervision when I've been a regulator. I've seen it as a CISO when you go in. Different analysts have different perception, different views on threat and risk and so on. You have now a scalable and efficient baseline, which I think is incredibly helpful and as a coaching tool to your workforce. But love to hear your view.
Yeah, I think on top of that, I fully agree, but it's also about being able to analyze much larger volumes of data and making much bigger connections between different sets of data that as a human, and if you can't have enough analysts to do that manually, so using AI to actually really bring all these data sets together and analyze this risk to fully understand what the impacts are in your environment rather than having one analyst's view, for me is a very powerful usage of it.
Yeah, huge potential. I mean, I think I said earlier about the use cases that we have running. One of those is within the risk management world within Royal London. And honestly, I'd never thought of it in terms of applicability there, but those guys have really got to grips with it and are doing some really cool stuff, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could be fantastic in terms of standardization across different risk realms, let's call them realms, right? I mean, for us in cyber as well, if you're risk assessing or assuring different disparate platforms and services, right, as you say, it comes down to the analyst, that person and that person. Even if they're both security analysts, might have different perspectives, and therefore I think averaging that out and aggregating that out is really powerful. At the same time, I'll come in with a second point though. I think the explainability, we did touch on this earlier on, the ethics and the explainability. Why did the model make that decision, or why do we think it's a low or a medium or a 5 or whatever the answer is, right? I think obviously today, if it's a human decision, then you can explain that. If it's a machine decision, then that's going to be more difficult to trace. It comes down to traceability.
So human curation might be required. But so is rounding up a little bit here. It may also help us marry two different tribes. We have a tribe in our profession that are very risk-centric and a tribe that's very threat-centric. One has more of an audit GRC background, the other one has more of a network defender background, i.e. the fighting people. And I don't know about you, but I've never really seen a happy marriage between these two tribes, right? There's been a lot of awkward marriages of convenience. Have we actually really have a meeting of the minds here? Maybe generative AI can help bridge that gap a little bit in terms of understanding. Because let's face it, when we assign probability to a risk, what do we base it on, right? In some cases, fairly good at the data. But then again, the threat world has a slightly different perspective, and also in terms of resilience as well, right? So you have the old Lockheed Martin way to look at resilience, which is quite different from perhaps other ways of looking at resilience. So network defender versus GRC, I think that probably is one of the huge values I can see, and that will make regulators very happy, which probably will be good for you guys, and certainly myself. So, and I think on that note, I think we've run out of time. Really grateful for your comments and feedback, really fantastic, and I think all of you will be here the rest of the day, I hope, drinking lots of coffee. And so I really love to engage with all of you to talk about this topic, because I'm a student, I'm sure you're students as well. Learn from you. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.